The child died screaming. On the polished obsidian floors of the hegemony's ground hall of justice, little Elara Desh's blood pooled in a perfect circle beneath her small, broken body. Her execution had been methodical, calculated, optimized for maximum psychological impact on the assembled representatives of the Terran enclaves. Governor-Executor Vormak hadn't bothered to use a cleanly lethal neural disruptor. Instead, the reptilian official had selected a ceremonial phase knife that ensured the 7-year-old would experience every microsecond of agony as her molecular structure destabilized from within. "The penalty for sedition is absolute," Vormak announced to the silent chamber, his voice amplified through the hall's acoustic enhancement field. His secondary ocular membranes flicked dismissively over yellow eyes as Elara's mother collapsed beside her daughter's remains. Let this serve as a reminder that the hegemony's patience with humanity's persistent individuality has reached its terminus. Across 17 star systems, the public execution broadcast continued uninterrupted. The hegemony's sensors made certain of it, commanding their quantum-entangled media arrays to override every communications channel in human space. They wanted every human to witness the consequences of defiance, to understand the absolute futility of resistance against a civilization that had dominated the galactic arm for 9,000 years. On the frontier colony of New Arcadia, Marcus Chen watched from his laboratory deep beneath the planet's northern ice shelf. His fingers gripped the edge of his console until the composite material cracked. He didn't blink when the broadcast finally ended, replaced by the hegemony's 16-pointed star emblem pulsing against a field of crimson. "System," he said softly. "Initiate protocol Lazarus. Authentication. Phoenix Omega 7-3. The laboratory's lights dimmed momentarily as power diverted to the facility's quantum communications array. "Protocol Lazarus initiated," the system responded. "Encrypted transmissions sent to all sleeper cells. Authentication accepted." In the orbital habitats above Earth, Admiral Helena Vostok received the alert during an inspection of what the hegemony believed was merely an atmospheric processing station. Only she and a select few knew that Habitat Station Gamma 9 housed the core of humanity's clandestine war fleet, vessels constructed in modular sections under the guise of atmospheric regulators and waste management systems. "They've finally gone too far," her executive officer whispered, staring at the alert pulsing on Helena's neural interface. "No," Helena replied, her voice utterly devoid of emotion. "They've finally given us the justification we've been waiting for." She turned to face the viewport, beyond which hung the blue-green jewel of humanity's birth world. "Wake the sleepers. Deploy the ghost fleet. The hegemony believes they've witnessed human weakness today. They're about to discover how profoundly they've miscalculated." The hegemony's dominance had never been seriously challenged. Their technological superiority, combined with their biological advantages, accelerated healing, extended lifespans averaging 8 centuries, and natural resistance to most forms of radiation, had allowed them to expand across 3 spiral arms with minimal resistance. When they discovered Earth 87 years ago, humanity was assessed, categorized, and summarily subjugated like dozens of species before them. Humans were classified as a Category 3 civilization, technologically adolescent, biologically unexceptional, but useful for their adaptability and endurance. The hegemony permitted limited colonial expansion under strict oversight, utilizing humans primarily for resource extraction on worlds too radioactive or gravitationally punishing for more evolved species. What the hegemony failed to recognize was humanity's long experience with oppression and their capacity for patient, meticulous resistance. For nearly 9 decades they had worn the mask of compliance while secretly preparing for the inevitable moment when coexistence would no longer be possible. That moment had arrived with the execution of Elara Desh, daughter of physicist Amara Desh, whose only crime had been requesting additional educational resources for the human enclaves. In the aftermath of the execution, the hegemony's intelligence division noted a curious phenomenon. Human productivity across all colonies increased by 8.7%. Work-related accidents decreased. Complaints filed through official channels dropped to their lowest levels since initial contact. "They're finally learning their place," Subdirector Kalzan reported to the Hegemony High Council. "The execution has achieved its intended purpose. Resistance has been neutralized through demonstration of consequences." High Councillor Thex, the oldest member of the ruling body, shifted uncomfortably in his suspension field. "I find this change in behavior concerning." It doesn't align with established human psychological profiles. With respect, Counselor, Calzan responded, our psychological models indicate that humans prioritize survival above all else. They're simply rational enough to recognize the futility of resistance. Counselor Thex's secondary breathing orifices flared in agitation. You fail to understand the species' historical patterns. When humans appear most compliant is precisely when they're most dangerous. The Council dismissed Thex's concerns as the paranoia of advanced age. 3 standard weeks later, the hegemony border outpost at Cygnus Delta went silent, then Procyon Station, then the administrative center on Tau Ceti III. Each disappearance occurred without distress signals or signs of combat. Facilities housing thousands of hegemony personnel simply ceased all communications within minutes of each other. When investigation teams arrived, they found the installations completely intact, but utterly devoid of hegemony life forms. Only the human workers remained, continuing their assigned tasks, as though nothing had changed. When questioned, they responded with the same phrase, "We serve as we are needed." On New Vega, seat of the hegemony's regional authority, Governor-Executor Vormak received the reports with growing unease. The pattern was expanding. 11 major installations had now gone silent, creating a steadily advancing perimeter of communication dead zones moving inexorably toward the core systems. Dispatch the Third Fleet to establish a containment boundary, he ordered his military adjutant. Authorization for maximum force protocols. If the humans have somehow developed a bioweapon targeting our physiology, I want it contained and neutralized immediately. The Third Fleet, comprising 217 warships, moved into position along the designated containment line. For 3 days, nothing approached. On the 4th day, sensors detected a single human transport vessel approaching at sublight speed. Admiral Krell of the hegemony flagship Inevitable Dominance opened communications. Unidentified human vessel, you have entered restricted space. Hegemony Directive 7 Alpha is in effect. Reverse course immediately, or face termination. The response came not through communication channels, but directly into the neural interfaces of every hegemony officer simultaneously, an impossible technological feat that bypassed all known security protocols. We have watched, we have learned, we have prepared. The voice was a composite of millions, a harmonic convergence of human vocal patterns, merged into something both beautiful and terrifying. For 87 years we have worn the mask you forced upon us. Today the mask comes off. The human vessel detonated, releasing not an explosion but a wave of quantum encrypted data that infected every system on every hegemony vessel instantaneously. Ship after ship went dark, their automated defense systems turning inward, targeting their own command centers with precision strikes. Within 17 minutes, the hegemony's Third Fleet, the most powerful military force in the sector, had been neutralized without a single human casualty. On New Arcadia, Marcus Chen monitored the operation's success from his underground laboratory. Phase 1 complete, he announced to the assembled leaders of humanity's shadow government. The Quantum Ghost Protocol performed beyond projections. And the hegemony personnel? Asked Councillor Rivera, her face illuminated by the holographic battle display. Contained, Marcus replied. The neural suspension fields are holding. They'll remain in stasis until we decide their fate once the primary objective is accomplished. Admiral Vostok's hologram flickered into existence beside Marcus. The Ghost Fleet is deployed. All sleeper cells are active. We're proceeding to Phase 2, the liberation of Earth and all colonial assets. And Governor Executive Vormak? Rivera asked. Marcus's expression hardened. As agreed, he will be the last to fall. We want him to witness everything, to understand exactly what his arrogance has unleashed. The hegemony believed they were domesticating a species of servants. Instead, they've been incubating their replacement. On the primary display, a new set of signals appeared. Humanity's hidden armada, emerging from concealment throughout hegemony space. Thousands of vessels, constructed in secret over decades, equipped with technologies reverse-engineered from hegemony designs and enhanced through innovations born of necessary ingenuity. Send the final warning to all hegemony worlds, Admiral Vostok commanded. Let them know what comes. The message was simple, broadcast in the hegemony's own language across every channel, embedded in every network. You took one of our children. We are coming for all of yours. Governor Executor Vormak watched the neural feed with mounting horror as the hegemony's 7th Battle Group, 32 capital ships and their support vessels vanished from tactical displays above the Procyon mining colony. Not destroyed, simply gone, like all the others. His scaled hands trembled slightly as he manipulated the control interface. The trembling disgusted him, a physical betrayal of weakness he'd never experienced in 3 centuries of military and administrative service. The private chamber's environmental controls automatically adjusted to his elevated body temperature, a cooling mist descending from hidden vents. "Magnify Quadrant 6, he commanded, voice steady despite his internal turmoil. The holographic display zoomed in on what appeared to be debris, the scattered remains of hegemony warships, standard procedure after a defeat. But as the resolution improved, Vormak felt a cold sensation spread through his secondary circulatory system. The vessels weren't destroyed, they were being rebuilt. Swarming around the hulls were thousands of microscopic machines, systematically disassembling the hegemony's proprietary alloys and reconfiguring them into new forms, human forms. His executive aide, Subdirector Kelvin, entered silently through the chamber's liquid membrane doorway. "Governor Executor, the High Council demands an update on containment efforts." Vormak didn't turn from the display. "What containment, Kelvin? Does this look contained to you?" "Sir, perhaps a strategic withdrawal to fortified positions." "We've lost 23 star systems in 16 days, Vormak interrupted, finally turning to face his subordinate. "Every retreat has simply accelerated their advance. The humans aren't fighting by any doctrine in our military archives, they're consuming our technology, our knowledge, our very identity." Kelvin's tertiary eyelids flickered nervously. "The Council is concerned about certain communications we've intercepted. The humans are referring to this as Operation Alara. They appear to—" "I know exactly what they're doing," Vormak snarled. "They named their vengeance after the child he had executed. The child whose death he had ordered to instill fear and compliance. The decision that now threatened to unravel 9 millennia of hegemony dominance." Aboard the newly commissioned Retribution, Admiral Helena Vostok stood before the assembled fleet commanders, their faces projected in a semicircle of holographic displays. Once secretive resistance leaders, they now commanded the most formidable fighting force the galaxy had seen in 10,000 years. "Phase 3 commences in 6 hours, she stated, her voice carrying the flat, emotionless quality that had become her hallmark since the execution broadcast. "The hegemony core worlds have consolidated their defensive perimeter around the region. Epsilon Eridani and Tau Ceti system intelligence indicates they've committed 90% of their remaining military assets to this final line." "And Vormak?" asked General Santos, commander of the trans-dimensional strike force that had so effectively neutralized the hegemony's vaunted 7th Battle Group. "Still on New Vega, coordinating their defense," Helena replied. "As planned, we're leaving him for last." Marcus Chen's hologram flickered with interference. He was transmitting from deep within captured hegemony territory. The integration of hegemony biotechnology with our quantum ghost protocol has exceeded projections. The nanophage has successfully infiltrated their central databases. When we initiate the final strike, they'll experience cascade failures across all defensive systems simultaneously. Helena nodded, then opened a secondary display. "Before we proceed, there's a matter we need to address. Our medical division has completed analysis of the hegemony's genetic structure." The display showed complex molecular diagrams rotating slowly. As suspected, they engineered weaknesses into our biochemistry during first contact. Subtle modifications that enhanced our value as laborers while ensuring we remained susceptible to specific biological agents they could deploy if we ever became problematic. Murmurs of anger rippled through the command channel. "What they didn't realize," Helena continued, "is that this same technique can be reversed. We now have the capability to introduce a tailored pathogen that would target the hegemony exclusive of all other sentient species. Deployment would result in extinction of their entire species within 14 standard days." The chamber fell silent. "You're proposing genocide," General Santos said finally, his voice tight. "I'm presenting an option," Helena corrected. "One that would ensure humanity never again faces the threat of hegemony dominance." Marcus Chen's hologram stabilized as he leaned forward. "We all swore that we would do whatever necessary to protect our people. But this, he shook his head. This crosses a line we may never be able to uncross. They crossed that line when they murdered a child to teach us obedience, countered Admiral Ewan of the Martian resistance cell. How many human children have died in their labor camps, in their experimental facilities? Are we really debating the morality of eliminating monsters? Helena raised her hand, silencing the brewing argument. I'm not making this decision unilaterally. We vote now, before the final offensive begins. One by one, the commanders registered their positions. The result was disturbingly close, 27 for deployment, 23 against, with 2 abstentions. Then it's decided, Helena said quietly. The pathogen will be held in reserve, to be deployed only if conventional victory cannot be achieved. She closed the secondary display. May history judge us more kindly than we judge ourselves. On Hegemony Prime, the ancient homeworld at the heart of their interstellar empire, High Counselor Thex shuffled through the ancestral halls of governance. His age-worn scales had dulled from their once brilliant emerald to a mottled grey, but his mind remained sharp enough to recognize impending doom. The projections are unequivocal, he informed the assembled High Council, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. Our forces cannot contain the human advance. Their technological adaptation rate has bypassed all theoretical limits. They're evolving their offensive capabilities faster than we can analyze them, much less counter them. Supreme Counselor Vazix, nominal leader of the hegemony's governing body, flicked his ceremonial sentiment tendrils in irritation. Then we negotiate, offer concessions, autonomy for their worlds, reparations for past misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? Thex's secondary breathing vents flared with rare emotion. We executed their children to demonstrate our power. We altered their genetic structure without consent. We relegated them to radioactive mining worlds while harvesting their arts and sciences for our benefit. These were not misunderstandings, Vazix. They were atrocities committed out of arrogance. Then what do you suggest? Vazix demanded, rising from his suspension field in agitation. Surrender to a species we categorized as barely sentient less than a century ago? Vex moved to the central display, activating it with a gnarled appendage. I've taken the liberty of analyzing all available data on human conflict resolution throughout their history. A series of historical images appeared, humans engaged in various peace ceremonies, treaty signings, reconciliation rituals. They possess a curious capacity for forgiveness when genuine remorse is demonstrated. Not always, but frequently enough to suggest a pattern. You're suggesting we apologize? The question came from Councillor Zevex, her tone making clear how preposterous she found the notion. I'm suggesting we acknowledge our fundamental error, Thex replied. We judged them by their technological advancement rather than their potential. We saw their biological limitations as proof of inferiority rather than recognizing how those very limitations drove their adaptability and resilience. He gestured to the latest battle reports. Look at what they've accomplished in less than a standard month. They've neutralized forces that took us centuries to build. They've adapted our technology and improved upon it in ways our engineers claim should be theoretically impossible, and they've done it all without resorting to the one thing that would ensure their victory. Which is? Vazix asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Total annihilation, Thex said simply. Our intelligence indicates they possess the capability to deploy a species-specific bioweapon against us. Yet they haven't. Ask yourselves why. The council chambers fell silent as the implications settled over the gathered leaders of a civilization facing extinction for the first time in 9,000 years. The Battle of Epsilon Eridani would later be studied by military theorists for centuries as the most decisive engagement in known galactic history. The hegemony had committed 3,000 warships to defend the critical system vessels pulled from every corner of their remaining territory, commanded by their most experienced admirals and equipped with weapons technologies previously held in reserve for only the most dire emergencies. They arranged their forces in a classic, three-dimensional defense lattice, with overlapping fields of fire and multiple fallback positions. Energy shields of unprecedented power enclosed their formation. Automated drone carriers patrolled the system's outer reaches, programmed to detect and neutralize the stealth technologies humans had employed so effectively in earlier engagements. It was, by every conventional assessment, an impenetrable position. The human fleet arrived not through normal space, but through tears in the quantum fabric itself, manifestations of theoretical physics the hegemony had dismissed as impossible. 2,000 vessels materialized simultaneously at precisely calculated points throughout the hegemony formation, inside their defensive perimeter, within their shield envelope. What followed wasn't a battle so much as a systematic disassembly. Aboard the flagship, Inevitable Dominance, Fleet Admiral Krazak watched in disbelief as the carefully constructed defense lattice collapsed into chaos. Human vessels using some form of gravity manipulation technology pulled hegemony ships into collision courses with each other. Others deployed what appeared to be localized time distortion fields, causing hegemony weapon systems to fire in slow motion while human attacks arrived at relativistic speeds. "Impossible," Krazak whispered, as another battle group vanished from tactical displays. "How can they be everywhere at once?" His tactical officer, struggling to make sense of the incoming data, looked up with an expression of pure dread. "Sir, they're not using multiple attack vectors. They're using all possible attack vectors simultaneously. Our predictive systems can't process the quantum state fluctuations." "Meaning what, exactly?" Krazak demanded. "Meaning they're fighting this battle in multiple realities at once, and somehow coordinating between them." A proximity alert wailed as a human vessel materialized directly alongside the Inevitable Dominance, close enough that Krazak could see the name emblazoned on its hull through the viewport. "Elara's Justice." The communication system activated without any input from the hegemony crew. On every display a human woman appeared, her features composed but eyes burning with an intensity that made Krazak instinctively retreat from the screen. "I am Admiral Helena Vostok of the United Human Fleet," she stated, her voice carrying neither anger nor triumph, only resolution. "Your forces are defeated. Your defenses have failed. What happens next depends on your answer to a single question." She leaned closer to the camera, and Krazak felt as though she were looking directly into his quaternary soul. "Was it worth it?" she asked. "The child you murdered to teach us fear, was her death worth the price your civilization is about to pay?" For the first time in a military career spanning 2 centuries, Fleet Admiral Krazak found himself without a strategic response. In the silence that followed, he realized that the hegemony had fundamentally misunderstood the species they had so casually oppressed. They had calculated human technological capacity, analyzed their biological limitations, and quantified their resource potential, but they had never bothered to measure their capacity for righteous fury. As the Inevitable Dominance's systems began to shut down around him, transferring control to the human fleet, Krazak finally understood what the ancient High Counselor Thex had tried to warn them about. "No," he whispered, though no one remained to hear his answer. "It wasn't worth it." On the command deck of the Retribution, Admiral Vostok received confirmation of the hegemony's total defeat at Epsilon Eridani. With it came the critical intelligence she had been waiting for, the location of Governor Executor Vormak's hidden command bunker on New Vega. "All forces," she transmitted across the secure quantum network, "prepare for final phase. Operation Elara will conclude where it began, with justice for a child." The orbital bombardment of New Vega lasted 27 minutes. Not to destroy humanity had evolved beyond such crude measures, but to communicate. Each kinetic impactor struck with mathematical precision, carving vast patterns into the planet's surface that could be read from space. Ancient human symbols for justice, vengeance, remembrance, and at the center of the continental capital, a perfect reproduction of Elara Daish's face, 7 years old, forever frozen in the moment before her execution, visible from the reinforced bunker where Governor Executor Vormak had retreated with his final loyalists. Admiral Helena Vostok watched the orbital feed with cold satisfaction as the last impact completed the pattern. The Retribution's command deck remained eerily silent, its crew focused on their tasks with the machine-like efficiency that had become the hallmark of humanity's military forces. "Quantum displacement field is established," her executive officer reported. "The bunker is isolated from the planetary defense grid. All escape routes are severed." Helena nodded once. "Prepare the extraction team. I want him taken alive." Marcus Chen, who had joined the flagship for this final operation, studied her impassive expression with concern. "Helena," he said quietly, using her first name for the first time since the campaign began, "the Council is concerned." About what happens after we have Vormak," about what happens to her. Her eyes remained fixed on the tactical display. Clarify. We've won, Marcus said simply. The hegemony is defeated, their military shattered, their leadership in disarray. We've achieved everything we set out to accomplish and more. He paused, searching for any flicker of emotion in her face. Some on the council fear we're crossing into dangerous territory, that this final act isn't justice, but something darker. They executed a child to teach us fear, Helena replied, her voice devoid of inflection. Now they will learn fear in return. And then what? Marcus pressed. We execute their leaders, their civilians, their children. Where does it end, Helena? What do we become in victory? For the first time in the long months since Operation Alara began, something cracked in Helena's carefully maintained composure, a momentary tremor in her hand, quickly controlled. Deploy the extraction team, she ordered, ignoring the question. I'll lead it personally. 300 meters beneath New Vega's capital, Governor Executor Vormak huddled with his remaining staff in the emergency command center. Designed to withstand any known form of attack, the bunker had been the hegemony's ultimate fallback position, a place from which they could coordinate a counteroffensive after weathering the initial human assault. Now it had become their tomb. All communication with the fleet has been lost, his tactical officer reported, the young hegemony officer's scales shifting anxiously between shades of grey and blue. Our quantum entanglement network it's being rewritten somehow. The humans have gained control of the entire system. Vormak stared at the briefing table, its holographic display showing the systematic dismantling of everything he had once commanded. New Vega had fallen. The hegemony's 1,000-year reign was collapsing in real time before his eyes, all because of one decision, one child. Governor Executor, his security chief interrupted, we're detecting a quantum disturbance within the bunker itself. Something is. The air in the center of the command center rippled, folded, and tore open. Through the swirling vortex of distorted space-time stepped a dozen humans in battle armor, weapons trained on the hegemony personnel. Behind them came a woman in a simple grey uniform bearing no insignia of rank, yet every person in the room immediately recognized her authority. Admiral Helena Vostok surveyed the cowering hegemony officials with the detached interest of a scientist observing specimens. Her gaze finally settled on Vormak. Governor Executor Vormak, she said, her voice carrying the same flat, emotionless quality that had become legendary among both her followers and enemies. You will accompany us for trial and sentencing. The Vormak rose slowly, his once imposing frame now hunched with the weight of defeat. You've won, Admiral. The hegemony is broken. Our worlds surrender unconditionally. What purpose does this spectacle serve? Why not simply execute me and be done with it? Because this isn't about you, Helena replied. It's about her, the child whose life you took to make a point. She gestured, and one of her soldiers projected a hologram of Elara Desh, the girl laughing, playing, alive, into the space between them. Before you die, you will understand exactly who she was, what you stole from us, from her family, from herself. Something unexpected happened then. Vormak's secondary eyelids closed fully, a gesture of profound shame in hegemony culture. I know who she was, he said quietly. I have always known. Helena's expression didn't change, but her hand moved fractionally toward her sidearm. Explain. She wasn't randomly selected, Vormak continued, his voice strained. She was chosen specifically because of her genetic profile, because she carried the Desh bloodline. He looked directly at Helena, his yellow eyes clouded, because she was the key to everything. The revelation unfolded in the Great Hall of Justice on Earth, the same architectural design as the chamber where Elara had been executed, but now repurposed for humanity's purposes. Billions across reclaimed human worlds watched as Vormak stood trial, not just for war crimes, but for the truth he had finally revealed. The hegemony discovered Earth 87 years ago, yes. Vormak testified, his voice amplified, to the assembled human leadership and the watching populations. But that wasn't first contact between our species. We had encountered humans before, over 30,000 of your years ago. Murmurs rippled through the hall as historical and genetic specialists frantically correlated this claim against known data. A hegemony exploration vessel crashed on prehistoric Earth, Vormak continued. The crew, stranded and unable to contact our civilization, integrated with the primitive human tribes they encountered. They bred with your ancestors, introducing certain modifications to your genetic structure. Marcus Chen, seated beside Admiral Vostok at the judgment panel, leaned forward. You're claiming the hegemony and humans share a genetic ancestry? That's biologically impossible given our different evolutionary paths. Not ancestry, Vormak corrected. Enhancement. The hegemony crew altered your ancestors, accelerated certain cognitive traits, suppressed others. They believed they were creating a subordinate species that would serve them until rescue arrived. His secondary breathing vents flared with a sound almost like laughter. What they didn't realize was that human biology adapted the modifications in unexpected ways. Helena's glacial composure finally showed cracks. What does this have to do with Elara Desh? Everything, Wormack replied. When we rediscovered Earth, our genetic analysis revealed something shocking. The modifications had evolved over millennia. They had become dormant in most humans, but in certain bloodlines, they were resurfacing. The Desh bloodline carried the most complete expression of those ancient changes. He paused, his scales shifting to a deep blue hue. Elara wasn't just a child. She was the first of what your species was always meant to become. The hall fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled humans. You executed her because you were afraid, Helena said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Vormak admitted. Our predictive models showed that within 3 generations, humans with her genetic profile would develop abilities beyond anything the hegemony could control. Cognitive capacities, adaptive intelligence, even certain forms of what you might call psychic potential. We thought, by eliminating the Desh line, we could prevent the evolution of your species into something that would supplant us. Marcus's expression hardened. So you murdered a child out of fear of what humanity might become. And in doing so, Admiral Vostok added, rising slowly from her seat, you guaranteed exactly the outcome you feared most. In a private chamber adjacent to the hall, Helena stood alone before a viewport overlooking the rebuilt skyline of humanity's ancestral homeland. The trial had adjourned for deliberation, but the verdict was a foregone conclusion. The question that remained was the sentence, and what it would reveal about humanity's future. The door slid open behind her. Without turning, she knew it was Marcus. The council has voted, he said quietly. They've left the final decision to you. Helena didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the recovered Earth. Before the execution broadcast, she said finally, I was different. I had a family, a life outside my duties. Emotions that weren't, she paused, searching for words, that weren't just variations of rage. We all changed that day, Marcus acknowledged, moving to stand beside her. But we don't let that moment define us forever. Helena turned to face him, and for the first time since the campaign began, tears glistened in her eyes. What if we've become the very thing we fought against? What if victory has turned us into them? Marcus shook his head. That's the difference, Helena. You're asking the question. They never did. She wiped the moisture from her face with a quick, almost angry gesture. Execution would be justice by any reasonable standard. Yes, he agreed, but it wouldn't be wisdom. The sentence was broadcast to every world in what had once been hegemony space. Trillions watched. Humans, hegemony citizens, and the dozens of other species that had lived under hegemony rule for millennia. Governor Executor Vormak, Helena pronounced, her voice steady but no longer devoid of emotion, for crimes against humanity, for the execution of Elara Desh, and for the attempted genetic suppression of our species. This court finds you guilty. Vormak stood impassively, awaiting his fate. Your sentence is not death, Helena continued, prompting gasps throughout the hall. Death would be a mercy you don't deserve and an easy solution humanity doesn't need. Instead, you will live as the liaison between our species during the transition. She stepped down from the judgment panel and approached Vormak directly. You took a child's life because you feared what humanity might become, she said, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness. Now you will spend the remainder of your existence helping to ensure we become something better than your fear imagined. Not conquerors, not oppressors, but stewards of the civilizations your empire neglected and exploited. Vormak's tertiary eyelids flickered in confusion. You're offering mercy? No, Helena replied. I'm choosing a future, one where we acknowledge the darkness within us without surrendering to it. She turned to address the assembled council and the watching billions. We stand at a crossroads. We can use our victory to inflict the same suffering we endured, or we can forge something unprecedented, a galaxy where power serves justice rather than domination. From her uniform pocket, she withdrew a small object, a crystalline pendant containing what appeared to be a strand of DNA. This contains Alara's complete genetic sequence. The potential, the hegemony fear, not as a weapon but as a gift to all sentient species willing to embrace a shared evolution. Marcus stepped forward, completing the explanation. The genetic modifications the hegemony introduced to prehistoric humans weren't designed to create servants. That was their mistake, their fundamental misunderstanding of their own technology. He projected a complex molecular diagram for all to see. These changes were meant to create equals, partners capable of comprehending the full scope of hegemony knowledge. The crashed explorers weren't trying to breed slaves. They were trying to elevate a promising species to join them among the stars. Somewhere across the millennia, Helena continued, the hegemony forgot their own origin story. They became what they had never intended to be, conquerors rather than mentors. In executing Alara, they tried to prevent us from remembering what they had forgotten. She placed the crystal pendant on a pedestal at the center of the hall, where it caught the light and scattered it in prismatic patterns across the chamber. Today we make a choice that will echo across generations. We choose to remember what it feels like to be oppressed, so we never become oppressors. We acknowledge the rage that fueled our victory, but refuse to let it dictate our future. And most importantly, her voice softened as she looked directly at the billions watching. We honor Alara not through vengeance, but through transformation. The crystal began to pulse with an inner light, responding to some hidden mechanism within the pedestal. From it projected a galaxy-wide network, indicators of facilities activated simultaneously across thousands of worlds, research centers, educational institutions, medical facilities, all dedicated to unlocking the potential that Alara had only begun to represent. Operation Alara is complete, Helena declared, her voice strong with newfound purpose. But Project Awakening has just begun. 50 years later, a young girl with eyes of impossible perception stood at the edge of the Transcendence Monument on New Earth. Beside her, an aging Marcus Chen watched with quiet pride as she effortlessly manipulated the quantum fields around her, creating patterns of energy and matter that would have been deemed impossible during the old era. "Is it true?" she asked, turning those remarkable eyes toward him. "That all of this began because of one child?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Alara Desh. She never had the chance to discover what she might become, but in her memory, we found the courage to discover it for ourselves, and to share it with every sentient species willing to join us." The girl looked thoughtful, her consciousness already capable of processing complexities that would have overwhelmed unmodified humans. The hegemony thought they were creating servants and accidentally created partners. We sought vengeance and found transformation instead. She smiled. "History is full of unintended consequences, isn't it?" "The greatest paradox of intelligence," Marcus agreed, "is that we can never fully predict where our actions will lead, only choose the principles that guide them." In orbit, above, vessels of human, hegemony, and a dozen other species design moved in harmony through the coordinated dance of interstellar commerce and exploration. Among them, barely visible against the backdrop of stars, the memorial station named Alara's legacy pulsed with gentle light, a perpetual reminder of how a single life, even one cut brutally short, could change the course of civilization. "Do you think we made the right choice?" the girl asked suddenly. "To forgive rather than destroy?" Marcus considered the question carefully, as he had countless times over the decades since that pivotal moment in the Hall of Justice. "I think," he replied finally, "we made the human choice to acknowledge our capacity for darkness while reaching for the light. The harder path, the uncertain path," he smiled at her, "the path with the most interesting questions at its end." The girl nodded, satisfied with the answer for now, though she would revisit the question many times throughout her long life, as would countless others across the changed galaxy, where the line between justice and vengeance, between transformation and domination, remained eternally worthy of examination. Not because they had found the perfect answer, but because they had learned to ask better questions.